All right, game makers. As promised, I'm here to talk to you about the boss that I created in my game. Just to illustrate what he does, he moves left and right. He shoots two different projectiles, and when you hit him, you can see that you get a damage report of how much damage you did, and that damage is determined based on where you make contact with the enemy. There may be some bugs, but for the most part, it works pretty well. And so here we go. So the boss, you should know or have watched the video on how I was able to transfer the sprite from the sprite sheet into the game. And so let's look at the create event. So in the create event, you can see I've got a couple things going on, a bunch of variables. The first thing I did is use the set instance health. So if you come over here and go down to the instances variables, health is an instance variable instead of just a global variable. You'll see that I did add 20 hit points or 20 health depending on your level. So every time you make it through the timeline, your boss will get a little bit stronger. He'll have some extra hit points. And then I created three states or three positions of being: damaged, which is false by default, of course; defeated, which is false; and in position. And in position will stop it from moving down our screen, and you'll see that in just a few moments. I have two alarms, one that will control the shooting. So alarm 0 generates a projectile that moves towards the player, and then I have another alarm that changes its direction from moving left to right. I set a speed, and then anytime the boss is on the screen, I want to pause the timeline. So that is the create event. So a bunch of things going on there. And then in the step event, I am keeping track of all those states, so those three variables. If the boss is defeated, then it doesn't need to do any of this other stuff. So when that happens, it does create a multi-explosion object, and that explosion just basically creates an explosion. I think every half a second for five explosions, and then it destroys itself. The scoring, actually, if I show you the multi-explosion object, the scoring takes place there. So when there's a multi-explosion, you can see that's where the score is assigned to the player. And I did use the global variable score here. So I didn't have to say object player dot score. It is the global variable. And you can see that it just creates an explosion right around where it was generated in a random location. But that's a different video for a different day. So back to our boss. Um, in alarm 0, you can see that it rolls a random number. It also resets the alarm, so it will shoot again, randomizes, gets a random integer with a 0 being the minimum, 1 being the maximum, and then that will determine which bullet. Which bullet is equal to 0, then it will create bullet 3. Now, bullet 3 is similar to the homing bullet in that it has to get the player's X and Y because that bullet is actually going to move towards the player. But if you remember from a previous video, if we try to use the object player X and object player Y, and the object player is not in the game, perhaps it was just destroyed, the game will crash. So we need to check to make sure there's one player. We need then get its location, set a speed, so we have a direction and a speed, which will cause it to move. If there isn't a player, then it will just simply move down the screen. And then the outside room, because this bullet is going to be generated inside the room, we can use this event, destroys it. So regardless of what direction the bullet goes, once it leaves the room, it is destroyed. So the outside room is a pretty handy event. So that's the first bullet. Let me show you the second projectile while we're at it. And that's simply a missile. And I took this from the sprite sheet, and I did add another sprite to it, which is a fireball. And so the step event essentially just creates the fireball behind it. And again, that's I think the details and adding little artistic flair like that makes a game more interesting. And of course, when it hits the player, it will destroy um, it'll create an instance of an explosion. It will destroy itself, and then or destroy other. And the other in this case, oh, this is I'm sorry, this is a collision with a player bullet. So the player can shoot this bullet down, but it also provides some protection to the boss, and you'll see that in action later. Um, Back to the boss. So alarm one simply takes whatever its current H speed is and makes it the opposite sign. So if it was moving to the left at a negative H speed, when this alarm goes off, it will change that negative to a positive, and it will start to move to the right. It's a great way to change directions. I could make it change speeds here, but I opted not to. Again, this is complicated enough. The draw GUI simply whenever you add a draw event to something that has a sprite, you have to indicate draw self, and then I had it draw instance health, which is different than the draw health bar, which I use for the player or for the player's GUI. So draw health bar is different than draw instance health, which is the one I chose here, because if I just did draw health bar, you would ask me which variable to put there, um, and then I would have to say, um, actually, I don't even know what I would do there because it's so confusing to know the difference between global health and instance health. Draw instance health was the obvious choice here. Now, the last thing, and it's a little more complex, and I wanted to share it with you, but I feel pretty good about it, is the collision with a player bullet. So I want the player, when he shoots the boss in the center, to get the greatest benefit or greatest reward. And so what I've done here is in my first temporary variable, I said find the difference or find the distance between the center of the boss and where the other bullet hit it. And so ABS is or absolute just simply makes a positive number. Um, so if it was to the left, I would have gotten a negative number. If it was to the left of the origin, so ABS just gives me a positive number. So it tells me how many pixels off of the center of the boss the bullet hit. And so we want this to be as close to zero as possible. We want to hit the boss dead center to get the maximum reward. Then damage is a variable that's a temporary variable that is 30 minus that difference. So in this case, if the bullet hit dead center, I would get damage would be equal to 30. The further from the center the bullet hit the boss, the less damage we do. And again, I want that to be a positive number. I just want to know how far from the center. Take that away from the maximum damage, and then that's what you actually remove. So minus damage, because this is going to be a positive number, I had to say negative damage in order to take away health. And again, this is the instance health from over here, not to be confused with the global variable health, which is usually applied to the player. Then you'll notice that I have a damage report. And damage report is another object that simply will indicate or put on the screen how much damage the player did. My damage, if you put a variable here, is going to equal the instance that you create. So my damage is equal to the creation of this instance, and the power of that allows me to assign a variable to this instance of damage report. So my damage dot how much damage is going to be setting. So if I go to damage report, you can see that it reports or draws the value of how much damage was done. So how much damage is an instance variable for this particular instance. It's defined as 0 in the beginning, but when we collide with the boss, with our bullet, you can see now it sets that to an amount. So whatever the damage is will appear. We'll want to destroy the other bullet. If health is less than 50, then we want to set the variable damage to true. In the step event, you can see if damaged is equal to true, then we're going to create some smoke. So we want to communicate to the player that the boss is smoking. It's been damaged. Its health is less than 50. So that's what damage does. If damage is equal to true, each step or each frame create an instance of smoke, which is a real simple object. It just moves down the screen before disappearing. Um, uh, while we're at it, we should talk about in position. In position, the boss comes down from the top, and when his y, his up and down variable, is greater than 96, in position becomes true, and that's when he starts to move left and right. So if in position is not equal to true, and is equal to false, then he continues to move down the screen. But the last thing, boy, we're all over the place here, is when the health is, so we don't need to know if health is less than 1 unless health is less than 50. So you can see that's been nested in here. So if health is less than 50, damaged is true. If health is less than 1, defeated is true. And remember, when defeated is true, that's when we create the multi-explosions. We resume the timeline, and then we assign the variable global level 1 higher. So the next time the boss is generated, he is going to be a little bit tougher. And there's a couple other things that are tied to global dot level as well. Um, so let's see, did I cover everything in the boss? So we have the create event, which sets up its variables. We have a step event that uses those variables to determine different behaviors, whether he's smoking, whether he's exploding, whether he's in position. Um, the alarm 0 determines which projectile it will send out. Excuse me, I got a cough. And then alarm 1 simply changes its directions, and then the last and probably the most complex one here is determining how far from the center the bullet hit, uh, taking that difference away from the maximum damage, which is 30, um, creating that little damage report that comes up when the bullet hits, indicating to the player how much damage they were able to do, and then of course taking away health and determining whether or not the boss dies. So again, the boss is in my timeline, but I started him right away, and you can see the result of that. So there's bullet 3 that he has chosen to send out. You can see he's smoking now because of his damage, and that loads um, the multi-explosion. So if I just keep playing here, we'll generate the boss one more time. Oop, got hit from the back. And again, this time the boss will be a little bit tougher. He's got a few more health points. And you can see that in the last hit, I got 13 damage. So that's the boss. A lot going on there. Hopefully that's some ideas that you can take and put in your game if you choose to. It's a long video. I appreciate you watching. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to ask.